Flosstube. My name is Becca, and I am SamBrie Stitches here on Flosstube and other social media platforms. This is a special edition, and usually it's a special edition of Interview with a Flosstuber. But we are doing just an interview with an amazing designer for this episode. I'm very excited to be here with Leanne, the incredible designer behind 1897 Schoolhouse Samplers. She doesn't have a FlossTube channel, as I said, but is very active on Instagram. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to interview her and get her out some more here on YouTube, is because her Instagram posts are incredible. She tells stories of her life, her really cool, unique job that she has. She talks about, the antique samplers. Like, you have to go follow her on Instagram, because you know how we share our life and stuff on here on FlossTube, some of our personal stuff and our feelings and all that kind of stuff. She does that on Instagram, and it's just the coolest thing ever. So definitely go follow her on that. She is an amazing reproduction designer, like incredible. We had a brief moment we got to meet at Nashville Market very briefly. Hopefully this coming one we'll get to chat a little bit more. But it was really nice to get to meet her in person. She dresses up in just amazing outfits that just kind of go with antique kind of samplers and stuff. So I will post the links down below for her Instagram, a website, and all that kind of stuff, so you can go in and check her out and make sure that you follow her as well. So before we jump into the questions, I was wondering if you wanted to tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Thanks so much. I'm just smiling here off all those wonderful things. So thank you. Thank you very much. You kind of alluded to, I do things my own way. I kind of have I hesitate to use the words alternative lifestyle, but I kind of do. I live in the past. And what I mean by that, it starts with my business name, 1897 Schoolhouse Samplers. I live in a one-room schoolhouse, or what was a one-room schoolhouse built in 1897. It was a place for educating local children until 1967, when it was decommissioned. My husband bought it in, goodness, I think it was 1991, and I came along in 96. We've spent all of the intervening years renovating. You can see part of it here in it should be a spare bedroom, but there's no spare bedrooms in this house because they're craft rooms. I think it's a familiar story for all of us. We also own a church next door that was built in the 1920s. I now work at a living history museum that's set in 1866, which is on the eve of our Confederation. That's when our country, Canada, became an independent country, independent with still ties, of course, to the British Empire. So I interpret life and demonstrate living history and cooking and historic cooking in an open hearth and a cook stove at Upper Canada Village. As you alluded to, as you mentioned, I have a passion for samplers. I have a passion for collectibles and books. And history just is kind of the through line through all of those things in my life. I came from a rural area where my family maintained traditions for a very long time. So many of the things that growing up I would have been embarrassed about, family having outdoor toilets and cisterns and hand pumps for water and all of those things that come along with a rural lifestyle, one where it's not kind of kept up with modernity. Now I don't have to be embarrassed about anymore. It gives me a connection to the past that really allows me to then bring it kind of fully to life and be able to share it with people who don't understand, because that was not their experience. So all that to say, thank you. And thank you for sharing my love of samplers. I can see so many of them there behind you, and I'm just looking at them and just thinking the same thing that, I hope you'll think when you see the ones that I want to share with you today.
Yeah, I just think that you're incredible. I love how you say that you kind of live in the past. I love that you bring history to us. That's incredible. I love it. So we alluded to the samplers, obviously, and we just had Sampler September. It's now I think it's Black Sampler November per Jacob, I think, right now. So if we could talk a little bit about samplers, what draws you to them, what makes you want to purchase them or reproduce them, and if you had any advice for people who are maybe looking to, want to own one or something like that.
Okay. Um, I think I have close to 350 samplers. They're stitched.
Whoa, I
Yeah.
thought I had a lot.
Yeah. Yep. The oldest one was dated. The oldest dated one is 1725. The newest one is 1970. It's over on the back of the chair, 78. Um, but I started for years and years and years. I watched eBay. Well, let me back up. I taught myself to stitch when I was 18 because I was working as a child and youth worker. I was working nights and I wanted something that was creative and I wanted to teach myself something new. You can probably see that there's a lot of craft supplies. There's another room behind here that's full of stuff. So I taught myself to stitch. I left it for quite a few years. And then somehow I discovered the cross stitch cupboard in Ottawa. And I discovered Berlin wool work and the work of Elizabeth Bradley. So Elizabeth Bradley is those big wool pieces and kind of the big floral and that kind of stuff. I then got into my favorite, which is Blackbird Designs. I have pretty much every pattern. I think the last time I did an inventory, I'm missing 30 of their patterns. And if you know how many they've put out, that's a lot.
Wow. Yeah.
And I kind of came late in the game and ended up being in a situation where I probably spent more than I want to admit on some of the patterns because I really wanted them and I loved them.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's this history there of teaching myself, discovering needlework, but I had no idea. I did have an idea that samplers were out there, but I really didn't understand the breadth and the depth of it. And so I come from, I've kind of alluded to it, but I came from an area where people didn't have money. Like we always went antiquing and junking and we had lots of interesting stuff, but it was stuff that really didn't cost a lot because we didn't have a lot of money. So I didn't have a perception or an understanding of what a sampler was unless I'd been to a museum and it was stuck on a wall behind glass. And so I started to look and I was seeing them on eBay and other places. And I've shared this before, but I really didn't know what I was looking at. I didn't know whether I was going to be taken or not. And so I just kept looking and looking and looking. And I kept looking at the prices and going, I can't afford this. Now, could I afford the $100 or the $200? Yes. But could I afford the risk of spending that money and it was a fake because I didn't know any different? That was where it was like, I'm not sure. So what started to happen was I started to develop my eye and seeing what I was seeing in samplers and starting to understand them more. I started to buy books. I started to read. And I started to get a visual sense for what samplers looked like in different periods, but I really didn't have a concrete idea. So I kept looking and looking and looking. And finally, I think I just got mad, honestly. And I said, you know what? I'm just going to buy one and I'm going to buy one that I really, really like. And if at the end of the day it comes and it's not what I expect, let's say I get taken and it's a fake, it's a print, it's somebody has it's a new reproduction, whatever I wasn't sure about what I didn't know. So I accepted the risk that when that sampler came, that it was going to be what I was looking for. So I think I started in 2014 collecting samplers. And so as I started to buy samplers and see them, I started to recognize without even realize what I was seeing, that the quality of the color, the what the linen looked like, how they looked when they started to deteriorate. And the one thing I didn't mention was what I was seeing was pristine, beautiful examples. And I couldn't afford those, but I could afford the ones that everybody else would overlook because they weren't perfect. They had moth holes, there was fabric missing, there were stitches missing, there were all these things that said, you know what, you're not worth anything to people in the resale market, because when it comes to antiques, condition is everything. And so I thought, you know what, I'm the kind of person that always kind of plays to the underdog. I'm going to buy those ones that everybody else overlooks. And I think I was toying in my mind about doing what I'm doing now. I've always been an artist. I started out in fine art. I think I felt very frustrated for years being in an environment where I was working in a business environment and creativity was not something that was very much appreciated. So the point being was that I don't know what I really had in mind. I just wanted this for myself. And I really loved what Barb and Alma were doing with Blackbird Designs, because sometimes they reproduce, sometimes they reimagine, sometimes they completely tore it apart and built it into something new. And I loved what they were doing and how they were approaching it. And the thing that really stuck with me was that I think it was more Alma, if I remember my history, is that she would be writing certain pieces, or she would talking about family members. And then Barb had a really wonderful connection with her mom, and her mom was doing a lot of her stitching for her. And so this really then talked to something that I try and talk to, which is the importance of women's relationships. So then, you fast forward, and I get to a point where I come to, decide whether I'm going to continue to work in business or I'm going to do this. And I was already at a place where I probably had 1 or 200 samplers. And then it just, in 2008, I went, got this other job working at Living History, which I'd never worked in before. I worked for Bank of America. I worked for Child Protection, all this other stuff that was completely a different thing. And I know I'm going off on a tangent, but I promise I'm coming back to samplers.
It's all interesting. I love it.
But the point being is that samplers to me has been as much of a journey to me as it has been coming to decide how I was going to do it, meaning that what I started to collect was what I could afford and what I liked. Eventually, I got to a point where I didn't want to just look at what I liked and what I could afford. I wanted to look at what samplers really meant. And that meant technique, that meant material, that meant alternate subjects, that meant exploring women's lives. It meant looking at samplers from other countries. It meant looking at alternative lifestyles. It meant looking to experts and people in the field like Lee Kruger and the Feller collection. So that's why there's 350 of them, because when I started, again, it was what I liked and what I could afford and what I could risk money on. Like the average price that I've spent, including shipping in Canadian dollars, is $159. So I have a few that are fine, but most of them are not fine examples, and most of them are going to be overlooked. And part of that journey was about also training my eye, seeing something that was on Whitney Antiques, seeing something that was on Finkel and Daughters, and then being able to identify where they came from, so regional styles or subjects, and then being able to find them in really poor, overlooked conditions and being able to draw those connections. Mm-hmm. So what am I looking for? I'm still looking for things that I can afford. I will spend more on a sampler if I feel like, if it really speaks to me. I have a sampler that I was bidding on eBay, and there's a gentleman, Richard Grzyk, and he sells samplers and does, I think it's Bloomsbury Antique Show. It's coming up this weekend, if I'm not mistaken. And I often would see that he and I would be working to buying from this same seller in England, and then it would appear on his weekly sales, and I didn't win this sampler. And so I sent him a message and I said, Richard, did you get this particular sampler? And he said, yes, I did. And I said, would you be willing to sell it to me? And he said, well, it hasn't even arrived, Leanne. Like curb your enthusiasm here, just kind of hold your horses. And so I said, no, I don't think you understand. I know it hasn't arrived, but would you please give me an opportunity to buy this sampler? It's beautiful. It's been reproduced. It's Anne Ellis Townsend. But the point was, it was finished on my birthday. It was finished May 5th. And so I had to have that sampler. There were samplers that came up through the Feller collection that I felt I really wanted to have, but it was a budgetary issue. So in that case, then I chose what I could afford. And then I had a whole long list, and there's a gentleman in England who will buy for me, and I pay him a certain percentage to work with me. So he picks for me. And he will offer me other samplers as well. His name is Andy Mason. And I had given him kind of a list of ones that I wanted him to watch, and we were online moving back and forth. And do you want to bid on this one? Do you want this one? Do you want this one? And then refining. So at the end of the day, what I'm looking for now, and I know I'm going on a tangent again, is the broadest expression of what a sampler is, and the most clear examples that I can find to show the privilege and the depth and the content of sampler making as it relates to women's lives. Because to me, it's not just a piece of needlework. It's not just linen and thread. It's really about women's lives, and a lot of women's lives, her story is buried. History is there for a reason, because that's who writes history. So for our history as a woman, I have to find that history through my family, through women's stories. I have to find it if it's written on a sampler, meaning, Mrs. So-and-so school, or I have to find it, or rely on those people who do the research and that I love to read, is finding it through men's probate records, through when they've died, or showing that they have accounts where it shows that they have paid someone to finish a piece of needlework. So the history, the underpinning is so important. And sometimes, I get to a place when I look at samplers, a lot of it is absolutely about individual stories, but individual stories then only celebrates one life. It doesn't really give the larger context. So sometimes it's more about, for me, taking a sampler and then digging into what was happening in 1726, for example, which is one of the dates on my samplers. Really important, and I'd like to, most of the time I can't tell who that person is because they don't date it or they don't give me enough information. Jane Smith, I'm never going to find you.
Right.
or some other common name. But if I understand what was happening in that time, and then I can relate it to what women's lives were, which men's lives are important to me, and I'm talking in that dichotomy because that's the way things were in history for the most part, and that's because of societal, how do I put this, societal norms and expectations in that time. But setting that aside, it's about those lives, and what I most relate to and how I relate to samplers is through the relationships in my family with women. So that's also part of what I'm looking at. And the reason why I'm drawing that out is that before we started, we said, well, would it make sense if I pulled some samplers? So I'm just going to show you some that kind of illustrate that. So these two, I'm going to just pull this over and turn this on, see if you can see that a little better. So this is a pair of sister samplers. And so one of the things that happens in selling samplers for people is that, rightly so, it's an economic proposition for sellers. They often make more money by separating them. And my interest in this case for Mary Holland and Elizabeth Holland is to keep them together. And when I bought these, the samplers were important. I liked them. But what I was thinking about was my sister and that relationship, right? So sometimes it very much is about, what the sampler has to tell us. And sometimes it's something like it's my birthday. Sometimes it's because it's a subject. Sometimes it's simply because it's beautiful. So I'm not sure.
Oh, wow. Look at that.
So this one, it was about, and I'm trying to bring it over here. It's about the imagery, but it's those people.
Yeah.
And my part of my life that I'm not sure I did in the intro explain, I live in this schoolhouse with my husband. We have about the beginning of December, we'll be together 27 years. So sometimes it's that sentimental stuff. It's that, just two people who are just trying to live and create a house.
Yep.
And create a life together and kind of work through and make it through. So sometimes it's that piece. That one was definitely the visuals and the color. Sometimes it's the verse. So I'm just going to read this to you. It's Elizabeth Beswick, 1855. If ever I'm doomed the marriage bands to wear, kind heaven propitious, hear a virgin's prayer. May the blessed man I'm destined to obey, still kindly governed by his gentle sway. May his good sense improve my better thoughts. May his good nature smile on all my faults. May he take vice to be his mortal foe. May every virtue his best friendship know. So in that case, then it's about the verse.
Oh, that border though.
But that border, right?
Yeah.
Which there's part of that as a modern woman, the idea of may the blessed man I'm destined to obey. Sorry, hell no.
Yeah, right.
But still kindly governed by his gentle sway. Yeah, sure. So sometimes the imagery, the content, the verses are definitely going to send me in different direction where I'm going to say from a personal standpoint, no. But if it illustrates something that allows me to get into what samplers were in the past, that becomes really important. I think it was, it may have been Isabella Rosner of So What. I think it was her. It might have been one of the other podcasts I listened to, but I remember a quote being that their realization that you could not in the past, you could not disentangle sampler making from religion in girls' lives was something that hit me right between the eyes. And that was something that you see very often, very overtly in samplers in terms of the religious motifs and in terms of the content and the verses. But behind it, there was this whole society that was there, this whole idea that that religion was very much part and parcel to everyone's lives, where today that may not necessarily be the case for everyone. And for most of sampler making tradition, in the most of ones that we see, a lot of it's predominantly a few religions. So then you start to see a very narrow version, a very narrow reality of what is kind of underpinning some of these samplers, which then goes back to, why I'm looking to try and find samplers from other places. Like I'm working, hopefully, I've got in touch with Erna Hiscox. She sells samplers over in Great Britain. I'm hoping to get my hands on samplers that were part of the sampler making tradition that intersects with British colonialism, which then tells more of that story. So again, it's telling the larger story. Sometimes it's rescuing. Somebody's decided that this sampler needs to be an oval. Can you see that?
Oh yeah. Yeah, now I can't. Yeah, there's folds on the bottom. Yep. Oh, yeah, you can definitely see it.
They haven't cut it off, but in many cases, they'd actually cut the outside of that sampler off. So I will get samplers that have been butchered because somebody decided, and for most people, that is an absolute no, I'm not buying that. But for me, I go back to that is a girl who had privilege. They were privileged to be educated. They were privileged to have materials. So for me, the fact that it's torn, it's broken, it's missing, whatever the case is, that never comes into my decision about buying a sampler. It's this one. Can you see the house?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You see the lady with her staff and her gentleman over here?
Oh my gosh.
Like, and the detail, it's also about the fineness of the stitching and telling you how that intersects with the development of the Industrial Revolution and education, and how that changes the actual quality of the stitch. Because something like this, now I'm going to put it back here, but if you look really close at that, you can see sometimes it's just the staining on the front left. It has been kind of kicked around and deteriorated. Now somebody's has tried, they've laced it, they put it on, but in this case, yeah, that building in this great big motif up here, you've got my heart before I ever started. And that border, this is a phenomenal piece. It would take a lot of work, but then it's thinking about that girl in that time, of the conditions in which she's working. We don't have electric light. We, depending on what period you're in 1866, we have bifocals. You don't see them on these ones, but in our general store at work, there's actually glasses with a bifocal in there. So they did have certain things. They had like these glass orbs, they would put light in it, and then they could put it in front of a candle and it would focus light on your work. So there was kinds of, they did have a certain amount of technology, but I use a magnifier. I use an LED light. They didn't have access to that. You think about, we're both glass wearers, right? I'm sure we both have issues with our eyes, but you think then of the importance of that skill being something developed in childhood. Think about then why it's not necessarily the case in adulthood. You're going to express it in different ways. The needle is, for a woman, in, going back through history when samplers are made, they're absolutely tied to their needle. And even if you are on the upper classes, you're still going to be tied to that needle, but your relationship might not be as necessarily kind of hand to mouth or clothing your body. But it's definitely going to be something that is going to be part of your life. So I mentioned earlier about major collections. This one comes from the Feller collection. And the reason why I chose it, if you can see here, see those two ladies? And I am sure I'm going to butcher the pronunciation of this, but these are representations according to the Feller Collection books. There's actually two of them. They can be kind of hard to get your hands on. Again, going back, Erna Hiscox has a similar one in her collection to this one. And these are the ladies of Van Laughlin. And they had an explicitly gay lifestyle. They decided in a time that they were going to explore that and go and set up house with one another. And live a life that they wish to, that was not in keeping with how most people would be able to live their lives in that time. And so one of the things that's really important to me is that everybody has a place. And everybody, when I say that at work a lot of times, where I will say to people, everybody has a place under my table, get your feet under my table. And what I mean to say by that is that I want stitching to be a place where everybody has a place. So if you're somebody who's new and you're self-taught, I want you to feel like there's a place here. If you're somebody who is an expert and you are technically proficient and you could win ribbons at when your work is judged, I want you at my table. If you are somebody who isn't traditionally, who might feel comfortable within the stitching community, I want to make a place for you. So this particular one is going to come out at some point. I have another one that talks about the, and I'm going to struggle with the way to word this because I want to say it the right way. It is one that it has an enslaved man with manacles on his wrists. And it was in a time when Quakers were involved in the movement for abolition of the enslavement of Black people in Great Britain, as well as my country. And so needlework at its underpinning talks about privilege. It talks about all these other societal things that are within there. And when I started collecting, going back to what you were talking about, I knew nothing of that. Like, I know history. I understand what the history is. I understand my history and where I come from. I understand the history of other people's, and I try and have as much empathy and understanding for history as I can. But I had no clue that all of those themes and all of those things were going to come up through sampler making. And I didn't understand the position of girls' education through history and just how deep it was. Because if I just go back to what you were asking me earlier, is why was I collecting samplers? I was collecting samplers because they were pretty.
Yeah.
I was collecting samplers because I like them, because I wanted to express an artistic need in myself, which I felt stifled. But it's become something completely different for me. And it becomes part of excavating history and excavating story. But that's really not what I'm doing in collecting samplers. It's making connections with people, and it's making connections with people far and wide and on as many different levels as I possibly can, and being willing to realize my own ignorance and my own need to learn and to listen and to be exposed to different cultures and different ideas. But at the same token, to be able to then never forget that this is something I love. And it is really, it brings a lot of joy to my life. But underpinning all of that, it's the learning, it's the understanding, it's the connections and placing it in history. So I have a couple more samplers if you have time.
Oh yeah, of course. This is so interesting. I'm loving this.
So this one is more on the technical side. This is more, I was talking a couple minutes ago about kind of excavating privilege, right? You have girls working in silk and linen, and having teachers. I'm not sure if I pulled out the one. I can pull it out in a second. Where the teacher's name is there. That's about privilege. That's about money. But if you start looking at subjects like darning, for example, sometimes that's really about teaching people useful skills, so that they're in a position where they can take on a role within society where they're going to provide a service to somebody else. So if you go in, if you're destined to go into service, meaning you're going to be a servant to somebody, you need to have useful skills. Well, then darning samplers. Now, sometimes they're beautiful and they have these floral motifs and they get just so elaborate, but sometimes it's pretty simple. It's about the technical execution of darning, and that becomes very important when you don't have central heating, when you have wood heating, you don't have insulation in your walls. You're in a position where your ability to make and maintain your clothes means the difference between being slightly uncomfortable most of the time, which is likely the experience, to being extremely uncomfortable and possibly having, damage to your skin because you're not protecting it enough. This particular one is closer to home, and I'm trying to get you to see that there without too much of a glare. This one comes from the East Coast. Samplers from my country are, I don't want to use the word rare because I think that a lot of times that's a sales tactic. You'll see that often on eBay where they'll say rare, rare, rare. Yep. Samplers aren't rare. Now, samplers that come from a particular school have, say if it's a Bristol sampler, it's an Ackworth sampler, it's a Westtown. Those are rare because there was only so many people that attended that particular school. But as far as the sampler making tradition, they're coming up every single week. You can find them all kinds of places. You can get all kinds of quality. But Canadian samplers, we weren't making them into the same degree because our population wasn't as large. We have less of them, so we have very dedicated collectors, so they get very expensive. There are some that are very fine, but a lot of them are not the kind of the fine quality. You look at the history and how that connects with sampler making and where we are in the Industrial Revolution and with our education of girls and all of those factors, it means that relative to your country, relative to Great Britain, yes, they are rare. There's less of them to have. So for me, Canadian samplers are ones that I will go higher on and feel comfortable spending more money because I know that they come up very rarely and I watch all the time. And that's a piece of advice, is that train your eye, go somewhere and start looking and start really looking at what the prices are. Prices right now are just through the roof, which I love to see, right? Because it means that people love samplers and they're getting the appreciation they deserve. But at the same token, that's where sometimes people can be taken, because on eBay, for example, there will be photographs of samplers that have actually been taken. Laura Ashley was one of the places that used to do that, and they would sell them framed, and you can't tell the difference. There are people who are way more knowledgeable than I am that will say, yeah, I almost got caught. And so that's one of those places. If it looks too good to be true, if you see a sampler and the condition's beautiful and they've got 99 cents on it as a starting bid, run the other way.
Red flag.
Red flag. If you see something that's in poor condition and somebody is really bidding it up, know what your limit is. Go in knowing before you ever start, I'm not spending any more than $100. Because if you just get in a bidding war, then potentially what can happen is, as long as you're fine with it, if you're fine with spending $1,000 on a sampler that might only be worth $100, okay, all the power to you. But that's one of the things that you have to remember, whether you're in a traditional auction setting, you're in an eBay setting, you're in some of the online ones where they'll allow you to continue to go till somebody bows out. It's just knowing your own budget and then knowing that you have to be comfortable that you could make a mistake and then your money could be gone, kind of like on Antiques Roadshow. This one is another beauty. As you can see, it's on its wooden frame.
I love that.
One of the things that always interests me with these is also about condition. And it's about having the conversation with people, because often people will contact me and they'll say, Leanne, should I conserve my samplers? And I'm a natural skeptic. And the reason why I'm a skeptic in this area is that I've seen samplers that are in beautiful modern frames that somebody has taken the time and the money to conserve. And then you take them apart, they have double-sided tape, they've been glued down, they have not put spacers between the sampler and the glass. And so then what happens is there's also this rush for me, and it kind of relates to the white in my hair. For me anyway, it's that everything has to look pristine and beautiful. And to me, I value the way that a sampler actually looks. I like the age on it. And part of the reason why I like it that way is because I like muted colors, but it's also because I know that if a conservator starts to handle this and they don't handle it properly, you're going to find black stitching or dark stitching start to bleed. You're going to find that the threads are going to break right off on the front. So there's always a risk in conservation, and many people will send out a sign and say, hey, I can conserve your samplers. And unless you know what you're getting into, you're actually risking your sampler. And if it's $100 purchase and you have no connection to it, no problem. But let's say it's a $1,500 sampler or a $2,000 sampler, or let's say it's your grandma's piece. And then all of a sudden you get something back that has been destroyed, or that has been degraded in an effort to make it look like it's new, when it is actually a 300-year-old sampler. And even if it doesn't immediately deteriorate it, the risk to that fabric and to those stitches through those cleaning processes could potentially down the road even degrade it further. So there's always a push-pull in terms of what you do. So this one, I have to say, it was those flowers at the top. Now, I'm a red house girl too. I go for the houses. I've got lots of houses in my samplers, but it was just a beauty. And there's one more I just want to show you. I got it this week. I actually found it on a local buy and sell site.
Oh, wow.
And I'll give you one other example here. On a local buy and sell site. So that's another piece of advice, is don't limit yourself to where everybody else goes to buy, because eBay is a wonderful place, but it's where everybody finds. And I try, and as much as I can, I share my sources where I buy samplers. I have lists of them on my website, because I feel that I'm more interested in garnering interest in samplers than I am in just finding those away spots for myself and holding them close. Community over competition, I guess, is the way I'd put it. So there might be local sites where things are being sold in your community, and if you don't watch them, you don't find them. So this one is a local site. It's Kijiji, Canada. And so often I'll go on, and sometimes I won't go on for months, and then all of a sudden I'll go on and find one. And this particular one was more than I would have liked to have spent, but if it's close by and I don't have to ship, and I can then go and take a look at it, I'll pay a little bit more. And the reason why I paid more was it is not rare. Again, I don't want to use that word, because again, I think it's a sales tactic in a lot of cases, but it's not always common to see the maker and the maker's teacher. And again, it goes back to that story of why I collect, because now not only do I know that this child has been invested in terms of the skills and materials, there was a woman who was making a living and having a life that was based on needlework in a time when women, for a lot of it, would have been highly discouraged from having a job outside of the home. And if they did have a job outside of the home, it was likely that they were either unmarried, which presented all kinds of risks and issues, or they were in a position where their partner, their husband, could not provide. So they were either on their own, potentially with children, or they were in a situation where their husband was not able to provide for them, which then, of course, which we don't necessarily think of today. If you think of it from a feminist perspective, how difficult is that going to be in a period when men are supposed to be the providers, and now all of a sudden they can't provide for their husband and children? So that's what's thinking in my mind when I'm getting this sampler. So you can see, I'll read it to you in just a second. So it says, Jane Hunt, age 12, worked this sampler at Mary Read Head's School, R-E-A-D, Head, H-E-A-D, apostrophe S, School, Middleton, 1832. Now, my sincere hope is that this Middleton is Nova Scotia, Ontario, or Nova Scotia, Canada. It might not be, but if I can find that is, again, going back now, not only instead of just on this particular one here, which is Elizabeth Parker, excuse me, her sampler, she wrought this on the 11th year of her age in 1824. This one has a girl's name in it. My understanding is she comes also from Nova Scotia. I have tend to find more from that area, but I have no teacher. Now, potentially, Middleton is an area down in the Annapolis Valley, if I remember my history from looking it up this week, that gives me a connection to my own history. And my own history then excavating in terms of the lives of girls, because very often I get the history of samplers from the United States or from Great Britain, but I don't get it from Canada. And I'm a proud Canadian. I love where I live. I want to see, how that affected girls' lives. One last piece isn't a sampler, but it is. It's a sampling of work. And it comes from Glee Kruger's collection. So her daughter Whitney, Glee has passed away. If you're unfamiliar with her work, she had a phenomenal collection. I have quite a few of her needlework pieces. I have some of her samplers. And she was instrumental in writing some books and contributing to research. And so the collection that Whitney is now finding homes for, I like the samplers. That's absolutely what I'm looking for. But I also I have 3 pieces which show their advertisements for girls' schools. And so then they will talk about where the girls were attending and what they were doing and what the cost was. But they were also doing things like this, which I'm not sure if you can see or not, but that's where a piece of paper is turned upside down. And then the design is drawn on it, and then a needle is used or a pin to prick. So it's called pin prick work. So it is an entire, I'm not sure if you can see that or not, it's an entire wreath. And the depth and the pressure and the way that those pin pricks are done then gives you this floral wreath that then a girl would have done. So the thing is that samplers, for me and my collecting and my work, they're about the work, but they're about a larger decorative objects. I'm struggling for the word. It's going to come to me. Decorative culture, material culture is the word I'm looking for, about women's lives and the skills that they were taught and practiced and was acceptable in terms of a skill development and expressions of creativity. And so for us today, we don't necessarily think about the limits on our creativity or the limits on our intellectual expression, but that very much was part of what was happening in that time. So if you look at histories of men and their work in fine art, you find very few stories of women. There more of them are coming to light, but there was men's history, men's artwork, and then women's artwork. We're relegated to craft, but this is fine art, but yet we use these terminologies. So I'm getting into a whole other place, but the point is that samplers then is about the life. It's about, not sure if you can see, but pins and needles and scissors and antique hoops. And so then it starts to then illustrate the whole life of children and girls in a time again when their lives were limited, and there were many people within society whose lives were limited, and how that intersects with decorative culture and sampler making and education and all of these other areas that you can then pull into something as simple as it's a sampler.
Yeah.
Cotton thread and linen, and it's a design, but it's not.
Wow.
So I know that's probably longer than you were looking for, Becca, but it's that's what makes that, to me, is what it lights me up. It's kind of like when before we started talking, and I said to you, you were kind enough to send me the questions, and I said, I'm just going to follow you and I'll go wherever this conversation goes. And that, to me, is the place where I find joy, where I just get to share that, and I get to hear it from other people, and to be able to see how other people interact with something as simple as a sampler. Hey, it's decorative, or more, they might see more of a meaning, or they might react to it because of a family history. They might react to it because they don't do it and say, you know what, I don't have patience to do that. And when you dig in there, somebody tried to teach them and they couldn't learn in the way they were being taught. So then they went the other way, instead of somebody trying to adjust it so they could teach the way that that person needed to learn. So it becomes all of those other things.
It's so in depth. See, for me, when I first started doing just like floss tube period, I would always say I don't like samplers. I'm not a sampler person. I'll never stitch a sampler. And then when we were at an antique store, my daughter and I, we found this at an antique store. That was my very first sampler, and it has the two um just marking samplers, just black marking samplers. And when I got that, I was like, I have a piece of history. Like I have a one of a kind piece of history. Now that those don't have enough information on them. I have a couple ladies that help me with ancestry because I cannot figure out the ancestry website. So we couldn't find anything. But I'm the same way with samplers. The reason why I have so many is certain things called to me. Like this one, I bought that for my husband because it was yellow and blue, which are his favorite colors for, I bought that because it made me think of my husband. Like this one over here, it's Hebrew. So there's Hebrew writing. Like there's so many things that I thought it was cool that that's what calls to me. I have another one that I just found out I thought was a Holocaust survivor, but it turns out she might be Ukrainian. And we couldn't figure out what the three letters were. And the lady that helps me with ancestry figured out that it was Ukrainian for January, the abbreviation. Well, my birthday's January 4th, and that's what it is January 4th. And I didn't know, I bought it because I thought it was a Holocaust survivor because a little bit of research I did. So like, it's so cool. Sometimes I just buy them to buy them because, they've got squirrels like that one that's up there, it's got squirrels. Yeah. But it's just the coolest thing to know that you have a piece of history and that, just to be able to reproduce it and to have the original it's just amazing. I have a question for you though. I'm going to stand up. So excuse me for a second. So I have this one sampler and it was stitched by a boy.
Well, that's, yep.
And I don't know if you can see it.
Yep. George Creighton got his love.
Native American. And it's got like a little flame type of thing down there.
Yep.
Yeah, 11 years old. I mean.
And so my question in looking at that is that a young boy who is Native American? And is that then related to residential schools? There was one particular sampler, I apologize, my nose is itchy, that I had found, and it had a St. Joseph school. And it was very similar to yours. And I see those quite often where you have those bright colors. So that's likely going to be colors that you're going to get after the 1860s, because in the 1860s is where you start to see aniline dyes or man-made dyes come in. So it's not that you don't see bright colors before that, but there's just a quality of that color that's going to change when you get to aniline dyes. And so those same kind of colors, if you see something like that that's in the 1700s, that's you're not going to see that on a 1700 sampler.
Right.
But to your point, I have seen one like that. And I will be honest, I did not buy the sampler because I was concerned. I was concerned with the implications, and I was concerned with if I had the how do I put this? I was concerned with the seriousness of me owning that sampler. And in some ways, there are other samplers like the one that I told you that was related to the Quaker movement in the abolition of the Black enslavement of Black Americans, Canadians, British. And so sometimes understanding some of that history, it becomes even more important to me to be able to, some of it I connect with greatly, and some of it becomes problematic as who I am and where I come from and what those histories are. And so sometimes I have struggled with which samplers do I reproduce and which samplers do I share, and what language do I use to be able to share this, to talk about history. And this is the same thing in my work in 1866 Upper Canada. It's how do we then kind of excavate and get into some of these histories, because some people, it is absolutely just about the decorative value. And I want to honor and respect that. For some people, it's about understanding those samplers much more deeply.
Yep.
And I'm thinking of a comment that you just made. I was actually listening to a new podcast that I found. Barbara Berman wrote The Pocket. And it is, I'm just going to try and see if I can find it real quick. Here it is. And I have to be honest, I've flipped through it, but I haven't read it. So this is her book. And so she was being interviewed by a woman named Ruth Singer, who does a podcast called Making Meaning. And then this morning I was listening to another episode with, and I can get you the name offline afterwards if you're interested, or you want to put it in your links. But it's a woman I've heard about her work before, and she's not a cross stitcher, but she does work in textiles and other medium. And she is exploring the Holocaust, and she's exploring the missing, and she is exploring the garment industry and the textile industry, and how that has connections to New York and the people that were disappeared. And so it then gets into a much deeper history. So sometimes there are samplers that I will see, and I will understand deeper histories. And then I question, how am I actually going to use this sampler in my collection, and how am I going to share it? As somebody who is committed to learning and always learning, but I know there's ignorance in there for myself. And so when you ask me that question of what I collect, in years past, I would have had a much shallower answer for you, and one I could have made in a lot less time. And now, as somebody who's been doing this for a long time, it's a much deeper answer, but it also depends on the audience of who I'm talking to, of what my collection means. Because when I say this is my work, to me, it's about connection. It's about history. It's about story. It's about understanding. It's about empathy. It's about, sometimes it's simply about paying respect to my mother and the women who lived before me and lived harder lives than I've lived, so I get to make the choices I get to make today.
Yeah, that's
but
incredible.
But in terms of back to the sampler that you have there, that is beautiful. And the quality of the color, and the fact that it says Native American, that to me is just,
yeah, I want to do some deep dive on this and learn a little bit more if I can on this. I just thought it was incredible. And you don't see samplers from boys very often. I think this is the only one that I have, that I've seen. So I thought I'd share that with you, because when I saw that, I was like, I had to have it. I don't think I paid a whole lot for it, to be honest, but that was something that I want to learn more about. And that's why I got the red sampler, was because I thought, when I did just some basic Googling of the name and that kind of stuff, that I thought it was a Holocaust survivor. My heritage is Jewish. So that to me called to me, but it turns out I have a different connection to it, which is great. But yeah, I love antique samplers so much, and just learning from them, which is great. So when you're reproducing a sampler, what does it look like your process? Are you comfortable taking them out of the frames? Do you leave them in the frames? That kind of thing. What is your process on that?
Okay. So back to your earlier question about what I look for, and what I bought. Often when I first started buying, because shipping to Canada is so expensive, I would actually ask sellers to take the sampler out of the frame for me.
Okay.
And in some cases, lots of times people will say to me, well, you know what, by doing that, you're lowering the value. I would look at the frame. A lot of times it was plain, it was whatever. And I had to make a decision of, was it worth me spending an extra $100 to be able to ship it or not? So most of my collection is not actually in frames. And I don't actually hang my samplers. So my goal is not to, and I have nothing hanging in my house. My husband and I have spent 27 years renovating this place, plus his time. So I haven't even put a single nail in the wall. So
that one.
what you have, but I don't have that. So I absolutely, most of the time, have the privilege of seeing the back. I sometimes won't take them out, like Sarah Alden that I released last year. I never took it out. They're actually carcasses of some kind of carpet moth that you where it had eaten into the linen, where there was an active infestation at one point in the carcass, or like the what's the word I'm looking for? The cocoon is sitting there. But it was just that sampler just said to me, you don't remove me from the frame. So the thing is, for me, reproducing samplers isn't a prescribed way of doing it. When you say, what's your process? I know that for a lot of designers and a lot of people, a lot of stitchers, there are people who they want the color that's on the back. They want what it would have looked like when it was stitched. To me, I think that's a relevant way of approaching them. But for me, I look at every sampler and I buy them from the front. I don't actually buy them for the back. And I know that color was something that people in the past were absolutely looking for. There were colors that were very prized that, before there was contact between Europeans and the peoples of South America and the discovery for Europeans of cochineal, that red was something that was just completely unheard of. And eventually it's going to become the red of a red coat. But the point is that I'm looking at each sampler as it is and trying to decide. So in this particular case, this sampler here, there's very little color degradation front to back.
Yep.
So on that one, I'm going to look at that and I'm going to decide that I'm probably going to end up working towards the back. And if something needs, like if I really love the front, I'm not going to be a purist and just go with the back and say I have to. When it comes to this one, I'm just talking color. I'll talk process in a second. This one is so degraded. I'm going to end up taking it off this because there's no reason why to leave it intact. But this one is really degraded. So I'm going to really struggle with this one. And so I'm going to be looking at the front, but there's times when the color's really degraded. A lot of times purple turns to gray when it degrades on the front. Or you get blues that will change or purples that will change. So I'm going to look at, sometimes it might not actually be the front, it might not be the back, it might be something somewhere in between. And some of that might be because of the color and the color of the linen I'm using. So I might have to amp up a bit. Sometimes I actually will allow the color to be very similar to the linen color. So a lot of times I'll hear stitchers say, well, I can't really see that color on the linen. But sometimes that's deliberate because that's the way that would have looked, right? So what I will typically do is, depending on it, how I decide to treat the sampler, whether it's in or out, or I can gain access to the back, I'm going to take every single color I can. And I'm not sure if you can see this over here or not. Can you see my threads behind there?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. All my mess. I'm going to pull every single iteration of color that I think I'm going to need. And then I'm going to pull the linen or linens that I think make sense. That daylight or that white light that you see over here, I'm going to turn that so that's not disturbing you there. Is that getting in the way?
No, I think it's okay.
It's okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to take white light if I can, or daylight. I'm going to put it on the dining room table and I'm going to walk by it. Now, it doesn't take me as long as it used to, but I'm going to walk by it time and time again. And I'm going to start picking out the colors that are speaking to me. And I'm not taking anything away. I'm not making decisions. I'm just saying, this kind of works better than this does. This kind of picks up what I'm looking for better than this does. And a lot of that to me is not a logical decision. That's a color interpretation decision that is very subjective. And it's also about what material I'm using. Am I using a linen? Am I using an overdyed? Am I looking for something that's really saturated in deep color? Am I looking for something that's muted and kind of variegated? Like, what am I working with? And that's part of that decision too, is that I love Gentle Arts and Gast, and those threads to me speak to me because they're old and they're grungy and they've got variation, and that's what I see in my samplers. Deep saturated color doesn't float my boat. But I love it, but it's not really what I'm driving for. But there are projects where I have tried. There's one called Giacomi Assagata. I believe it's likely an Italian sampler, but I couldn't kind of figure out where. Mm-hmm. I tried 4 different thread lines, And I don't stitch in DMC, and it's because I don't see in that saturated color. But that sampler, no matter what I did, I could not get it to work with any other color range. So I ended up changing completely and going to DMC because that sampler needed DMC. So the thing is that it's one of the reasons why a lot of times people will say to me, well, why don't you give conversions? And it's because, to me, I spend hours walking by the dining room table, then starting to stitch, pulling stuff out. I might actually change a color 7 times. I don't stitch on an alternate cloth. I stitch on the fabric, and if it doesn't work, I stitch it and I pull it out, because color together looks different than on a table. And when you put it next to another color and on a different linen, it has a different effect. So then you have to decide in concert. So then when someone asks me, well, can you just put that in DMC for me? That's a very difficult thing for me to do, because there's an entire artistic process of me coming up with how I'm going to treat that sampler. Because if I look at something like this one here, I'm not pulling that out of the frame. I'm not even going to consider it, because this one is an Ontario sampler. That one that is here, that is the Ladies of Van Laughlin.
Right.
I'm not taking that out of a frame. So then I'm going to be limited to what I can see. So I remember having a conversation with Gary Parr very early on in my career, and we were on a podcast, and he asked me the same question: what's your process, Leanne? And I was very insecure at the time, because I had this sense that there's a right way and a wrong way, and that you're supposed to do it like this. And I didn't want to say to people, I don't agree with you. I appreciate that's how you do it. But now, 6 years on, I'm in a place where what I want to do is, instead of saying this is the way to do it, it's more, this is the way to think about it. There's this way, which is, here's the way you look at it from the back, or you look at it from an individual, you can look at it from a materials perspective, all these different ways you can look at it. But at the end of the day, the materials go on the table, every possible iteration. I start stitching. I inevitably, no matter which sampler I do, there will always be something I will second guess myself on. I just released a sampler at Hobby House, and I had my first in-person retreat, and I said to the people who were there, can you tell which color in this sampler that I hate? And what do you mean? Well, it's because I could not trust my judgment. And the only time that, when I go, and I said that with a little bit of a smile on my face, because once I got it framed, and it wasn't when it was finished, but it was once I got it framed and I put the frame on it and I sat back from it, I'm like, yes, I made the right decision. But the whole way along, it was, I can't stand this color. I can't stand this color. I can't stand this color. That's not the right color. That's not what the sampler needed. That's not what it's telling me. And so process then becomes more in terms of getting to that place where I'm comfortable with the choices I've made, more necessarily than the colors I actually choose in the end.
That makes sense. I'm I've removed some from the frames because I tend to like the back if it's too faded. I have one that I'm actually currently almost done reproducing, and these are the colors.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I love those. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, those are the colors, but those are the colors on the front and the back. Like it's not like, it's crazy. So I get the whole color matching thing. It's really, really a challenge. And I'm newer, obviously, at doing the reproductions. And I always thought that there was a certain way, that it had to be done, and that I didn't want to screw it up because I wanted to be taken seriously. And Julie, Kansas City Girl in the Colorado World, does reproductions. And I love how she offers the color versions. She does the front and the back. I mean, that's a lot of work.
That is.
But it's just incredible that she offers that, and that it's inspiring. I don't know if I'll ever do that, but I also get that even on my original designs, sometimes I don't offer the DMC conversions if I use variegated, because there really isn't a DMC conversion for it. That, I used it for a reason. It doesn't match a DMC. So there's been times where, I've just not done a DMC on my originals just because I didn't feel like it would be, even remotely accurate, if that makes sense. And I'm like, people will message me and I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't have one. I would love to see what colors you choose based off of it, that kind of thing. But sometimes you just can't offer them. That's just how it goes.
Can
Um,
I ask you a question?
yeah.
There's two other ones that I'm working on, and I'll just explain them and then ask your question how you feel.
Mhm.
I have one that's really badly degraded, and I've decided that I'm throwing all the rules out, and I'm doing it. It's a cream colored background, and I'm going to do it on purple. All the colors, like the ones you just showed me, I'm just amping right up to the nth degree. I have another one that I've used where, again, it was just kind of the standard pinks and purples and all of this stuff, and I decided that I was going to go. I was scared of using a very dark colored linen. So I decided I'm going to choose a dark colored linen, and I'm going to find historic samplers with a similar color palette to the one I want to do. And I'm going to use that as inspiration to then completely redo.
Yeah.
And so, you know, my process is never a process. Do you find that in terms of giving yourself permission to do it? That's the thing that I'm working on, is giving myself permission to do this thing the way I want to do it.
Yeah.
And sometimes being able to say, this is the way I do it. I know that there are other ways of doing it, which I love. And I want you to go after and do those things. And I'll support you, like DMC conversion. If I don't have you, I'll tell you where it is, or these shops will help you. All of here's a way of being able to do it.
Yep.
But give yourself that permission to then be able to approach it in a way that doesn't, you can't be consistent on it. It's, if I might do it this way this time, I might do it this way this time. Or if I'm the kind of person that I need to have those rules and I do it the same every time, do that. Do you find that giving yourself permission is something that is part of your work?
So I think so. And when I first started, I would message Julie, I would message my friend Susan Stanley, because I was asking permission, basically. And then I started to realize that I think that's what makes us all unique, in our reproductions or in our designing period, is how we do things. There really isn't a rule. I think after a few years of doing this, to where you try to do the best that you can to reproduce it, to to give it new life, basically. But there also is reimagined too. So if you want to change the fabric color, change the fabric color. That's I mean, for me, that's, I will tell you that it's probably frowned upon in the community, even though there are no rules, that a lot of my reproductions I do on Ada. I'm not completely 100% true, because at the beginning, I was stitching my own models and I really despise linen. I did stitch a huge reproduction on linen and despised every stitch. It's beautiful. So I reproduce on Ada, and I'll tell you that's my own thing, because if you if you ask other people, they're probably like, that's not okay. You should do it on linen. But the stitcher's going to choose whatever fabric they want to stitch with anyways. So if I've got to stitch the models and it's still reproduced true to like colors and that kind of thing, I use Ada for a majority of my stuff. So yeah, I give myself permission. Hopefully it's okay. People seem to be okay with it. I don't, I don't know. I just say give ourselves some grace, and that's what makes each of us unique as designers and reproductionists is, as long as you get it done and it looks nice and you're, true, unless you're reimagining, you're true to the original stitcher, you know, no harm. So that's just my view.
And that's kind of where I'm going, is I want to give myself permission, and I want to give everybody else who is interested in my work is permission to take my samplers. I say my because I own the girls that
Yeah.
right, but of sharing that and then encouraging people. You know what, you don't like my brown house, put it as a red house. You
Yeah.
you don't, I if I have people, I always give skin and hair color conversions so people can see themselves in it. and that permission, I think, is important.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't even think about that, doing the conversions. I don't think mine, that's one thing that doesn't really call to me is the people in I like the motifs or the houses, but that's actually really cool that you do offer like skin conversions and stuff like that for it. But yeah, I mean, I just think it's the coolest thing ever to see somebody stitching one of my designs. I don't care if you change the colors. I don't care, as long as, as long as you say that it's my design or whatever and I can see it, it's the coolest thing ever. It still blows my mind to like go down to Acorns and Threads and people will come in, with my chart and be like, "Oh,
Yeah,
it's crazy. It blows my mind still. And I don't care if I never like sell, tons and tons of charts and become this huge designer. Just to have somebody bring in their piece that they stitched of my chart makes my whole day. Like it just is incredible. So yeah.
absolutely. I want to just give one plug in case anybody does want conversions. Those aren't my conversions. I'd actually asked another designer. His name is Lord Libidan. And
Yep.
if you look up Lord Libidan, he has those DMC conversions, and he very kindly gave me the permission to share them on my website and on the patterns. So anybody looking for those, head over to his site, and give him kudos for doing that, because I couldn't find it anywhere. I bought crayons. It's called Colors of the World. I think there's
Yeah, I've seen that pack. That's cool.
the Colors of the World when I was designing the people ones, wanting to make it inclusive for everyone, and then I happened upon his. So
Yeah, his site is very cool because there's also alphabets on there that he gives permission as long as you give him credit for it. It's a very cool site. Very cool. So we're gonna get out of Stitchy talk a little bit, and talk a little bit more about you. And I kind of know the answer probably to this question, but what's your favorite genre of book or movie?
historical,
Sure.
hands down. BBC and WGBH Boston do a lot of collaborations, that kind of stuff. Yeah, anything history.
Yep.
It that's the intersection. It's yeah.
I love that. I mean, that was obvious, but we just had to ask it anyways, just in case there was this off chance that it was something else. But um, do do you have like a fictional place that you would most like to go to?
Uh, fictional. Well, I think, I'm not sure if you call it fictional, but I get to live it 5 months a year, and that's 1866 at Upper Canada Village. I work in a place that never existed. It was created after the development of the St. Lawrence Seaway. There is a general store, there are farms, there are trade shops, there are mills, there are people dressed in period costume. I'm surrounded by people who understand, live, and practice history. And that's what these things. So, when somebody is, we have a tinsmith, and using his skills, he builds the downspouts and the water, the eaves troughing. Myself, I take period recipes and as much as I possibly can, like we milk our own cows and we pasteurize the milk, right? So I use those ingredients along with the things that the gardeners grow, and I bring them to life and I feed them to people. So as far as a fictional place, I peg it there because I've been going there since I was 3. And now I get to work there 5 months a year. So it is a fictional place. And I know that's kind of not what you were looking for. So if it was a pure fictional, it would absolutely be Avonlea. It would be Anne of Green Gables. And yeah, I'd be the one with, tongue hinged in the middle, and the red hair, and the, getting into scrapes, but always kind of engaging with the world with a kind heart, and an interest and a love of learning. That would be the true fictional place for me. But otherwise, it's where I get to live for 5 months of the year.
I think that's so cool because you give us sneak peeks on your Instagram posts of your job, and I just think it's like the coolest thing ever to be able to do that. I mean, it fits you perfectly, anyways. So there's that, but I just think it's cool. So if you could choose to do anything for a day, what would it be?
I could choose to do anything for a day.
Yep.
I would struggle to pick one thing, but let's say that it's this. It's 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 learning. It's, you know, trying my hand at pottery. It's going and spending the day with somebody who is weaving on old Hattersley looms like Woven in the Bone, or working with somebody who is a master tailor on Savile Row in England, or going to some of these amazing textile shops and manufacturers that exist in Italy and France and England. People who really know what they're doing, they have muscle memory and knowledge and passion in their hands. Whether I get to participate, which would be the ideal, because for me, when you participate, you really learn. It's one thing when I talk to you, it's different when I share it with you, when I show you, when I involve you, I learn. But
Mhm.
just to be able to be in those places, and it wouldn't matter which one it was, to be able to then see those things that are so far from the world that most of us live today. You know, I'm just like everybody else. I struggle with, you know, spending too much time on my phone, and I often will say to myself, you know, get off the phone and get doing, because that's what you want to do when you're not, when I'm sitting at work and I think about my time away from work, I think about doing, and then I get home and I get on that thing, and I'm like, okay, why don't you just go and sit at your needlework system 4 and start putting in stitches, or your LBC, whatever, or your Hardwick frame, whatever. It doesn't matter what that piece of equipment is. So for me, it would be more about the learning and going somewhere and learning something that is really a privilege to learn, because most of what I know I teach myself, but there are things that I can't teach myself that master craftsmen have to teach you, that you probably won't ever even learn, because you have to learn in the doing. But just being in that environment with those people, to me, would be amazing.
That would be incredible. Speaking of teaching yourself, did you teach yourself to stitch, and how long have you been stitching?
I taught myself to stitch when I was 18, but if you go back through my history, when I was a kid, I was always doing something. I was whittling. My grandmother had a sewing machine. No one ever showed me how to use it. She let me borrow it. I learned how to use it. Then a friend of my mom's, she was the director of an ARC Industries, which was, I'm not sure if it was in the United States, but it was in operation here in Canada for learning and social and job opportunities for people with developmental disabilities. And so she, at the time, they were buying very large bolts of fabric that would have like panels, and the panels would have deer and loon and all this kind of stuff, where the participants in ARC Industries would then do all of the sewing, and they would sell it in the shop, and it would provide them an income, and provide them social outlet. Because when you aged out of high school, there were no opportunities and very little job integration. So it was a way of being able to get by society's inability to be able to provide opportunities for everyone, to be more inclusive. It isn't there any longer. I think our society, at least in Canada, is trying to move beyond that, and try and find more integrated opportunities. But there were panels along the side that had little pieces, and they would always cut those off. So my mom's best friend Arlene, my mom and had a twin, and she and her had a twin. So they chummed around in my mom's twin had died when she was very young. So my mom got to feel like she kind of had that twin experience. The point being was that Arlene gave me these strips. And so I taught myself how to quilt with a sewing machine I taught myself how to use from that, because this friend of my mother's was someone who saw in me an artistic streak and somebody who wanted to learn. My grandmother collected buttons. She used to be in the family. Everybody would give her all the old clothes, and she would cut up the pieces and make scrap quilts. And then she'd take the buttons off everything. Well, when she passed away, I got all of her buttons. So I was constant, and I spent a year and a half in fine art. So by the time I was 18, I had already done figure drawing and printmaking and oil painting and watercolor and quilting and cross stitch and crochet. I could never learn to knit. The only class I ever took, or the only time that somebody actually taught me, I think, a craft, was knitting, when Mrs. Cox, who lived next door to us, taught my sister and I. My sister can knit, I can't. about 10 years after, I'd say when I was in my mid 20s, 30s, my sister and I went and took a class in knitting. My sister knits better. I can't knit.
I can't knit either. So
I, I have this whole history of craft. So for me, cross stitch fits within, you kind of can't see it, but those are all, these ones are those ones are more general and stitching, but not cross stitch. This is all cross stitch and samplers. Well, there's another bookcase in another room, and then there's a whole room of supplies, and there's another one here. And so for me, that teaching myself is always about that mastery of figuring it out. And it's also about the potential of, I always have something to do. I can always then, I could be doing embossing, I could be doing embroidery, I could do cross stitch. All of those things kind of fit in that.
okay. So other hobbies besides cross stitch, you sew and you crochet and you do all that. Do you still do that now with you doing the reproductions and that kind? No.
Very little, very
Yeah,
little.
because there's no time.
There's no time, but there is something I wanted to show you, and I've been meaning to share this online. And it's something that relates to our stitching, if we have time here.
Oh, of course.
I went to Hobby House Needleworks to do a retreat, which I mentioned. And when I went to that, I had an opportunity to meet Maggie Bonanomi, and I think I'm pronouncing her name right. And so I knew of Maggie through Blackbird Designs, because Blackbird Designs, as I mentioned, is kind of a little bit obsessive. I went to a retreat once at Dying to Stitch, and I won it from Ann and Pat. And I showed up with a roll this big, because that was all I was stitching was Blackbird Designs. And so I have not had a chance since then to meet Barb and Emma. And of course, Barb has sadly passed away. But I knew Maggie through Blackbird Designs. And one of the things that you were asking me about, do I stitch other things? Do I get working other things? And do I have time? And I don't. And I'm feeling it really hard at the moment, because I'm stitching for my work. I'm working on my work. I'm working on myself, but I actually don't have a creative expression where I don't feel the influence. And I don't want to use the word interference as a negative, but the stitcher who's going to be getting my products, my patterns, is always in the back of my mind. Trying to make something that I think works for people who might want just to stitch in DMC, might want something that is no over one. There's a whole lot of different things that I'm kind of thinking about, all the stitchers that are out there. And so I am actually in a place where I feel very creatively constrained. And so when I went, I was actually hoping, I had an opportunity to teach 4 classes at Hobby House Needleworks. And I was actually hoping that I wouldn't have 4 full classes. I would actually have one free to go take Maggie's class, because she was teaching at Hobby House alongside me.
Yep.
And so when I went in to that experience, I'm just looking here. There's more of them, and I'm not sure where they are, but I had one of her books. But I had, as I said, I had seen her all over Blackbird Designs for years. And so I was having a little fangirl moment, like this is, and not trying not to, but it's that art. This is somebody who's doing what they want to do, and they're doing what they are, and they're doing that. This is my impression of not knowing her as a person, but just as seeing her work. And that to me is a real inspiration. So I walked up to her table, and I think I had one of her dedicated books. And then this one was on the table. So I picked this up, and this was in the back of my mind of one of my goals for this winter is to start to explore my own creativity. And I want to take the motifs in my samplers and start to reimagine them in different ways. And I don't know where that's going to take me. I think it's going to be wool applique, but I walked to her table, and she had an example of linsey woolsey. And so linsey woolsey is a type of fabric which connects to our samplers that is a background material. And one of the areas that I feel my knowledge isn't good enough is what is the material in my samplers? And I think I know, but I actually need someone to teach me and be able to have hand-on examples. Well, this piece, like, it's threadbare. It's been darned. It has a number printed on it.
Wow, that's cool.
like it's moth eaten or it's
Yep.
worn. And she had it for sale for $10. I'm pretty sure, based on the conversation with her, that a lot of the items that I'm going to show you in just a second that she brought with her, she's probably not covering her costs, but she wanted to bring something. And I think what I got from it, and maybe she intended this or maybe she didn't, but that she was bringing inspiration for other people. And that's what I walked away from. So there was all these little bits and bobs and pieces and cut up squares, again, going back to samplings of work. But the last one, and there's more there, but it was this one. I don't know whether the technique is called trapunto or it's stuffed work, but you can actually see how stuffed it is.
Yep.
And so, you know, she has on there, stuff work, make a great pin keep. And so I ended up coming home and I have every one of her books now. I've managed to order every single one. I think there's one that I can't seem to find. And every time I look at it, it's like it's $400. And I'm like, I have spent not quite that much, but I've spent way too much on Blackbird designs. I'm going to have to find the time to find the last one. I don't have to have every one, but I don't get enough time to do that. And that's what I'm hoping this winter is that I will find a way, and I'm hopefully going to have some help from someone to do some of my model stitching because I can't do it all myself.
That's what I was going to ask you, is if you do your own model stitching. Yeah.
Up
Okay.
to now, I've done all of it, and I do all my photography. The only thing I get help with is my, up until now, I have an accountant who does my year-end books, but I do everything to provide to them. They essentially plug in numbers. I have somebody who does my stretching and framing, and typically I use antique frames. And I have somebody who takes all of my photography, my layout, my design, my patterns, everything, and then puts it into a computer program and then makes the changes that I want and then prints it. So
Okay.
I've done everything myself that I can because I've shared many times on Instagram. I've never paid myself a penny. I can't yet. I invest in the things that I need, and you know, I'm getting to the point where I can do that, but I'm going to get more help with my accounting. I'm going to get more help with doing some of the model stitching, and I'm hoping that that expression of creativity of my own sometime in the winter will allow me then to kind of put a new spin on that process question that I still can't answer, that I could keep talking the same way. When you asked me about samplers, you were probably looking for a 2-minute answer, and I probably
Oh,
went on a half an hour tangent. It's the same kind of thing of articulating something that it's artistic, it's not intellectual. You know what I mean? Like it's just
yeah. No, I get it with kind of feeling constrained, because when I first started designing, I wanted to be taken seriously, and I would model stitch my own things, and I would release 3 to 4 patterns every month. And
oh wow.
mind you, mine are small and there were reproductions. So, because I wanted to be taken seriously. And so when I got to market, I had all of my models there, for that. But I think with you getting a model stitcher is going to help, because I have a couple model stitchers, my sister being one of them. She's just amazing. It takes off some of the stress, because like my sister's very good at communicating and colors and that kind of stuff, and so that helps, because you want control of your piece, and I think that's why you model stitches, because you change the colors, or this doesn't work, and that was the stress that I was getting with sending it off. But it frees up some of your time, and I think that will help you quite a bit, because it sure helped me to where I can do a little bit of personal stitching too, because there's things that I want on my wall that are from other designers and that kind of stuff. So it is very constraining that we have now turned, we still love cross stitch, we still love our needlework, but it's a job now. And there's a difference, there's a big difference. So having model stitchers definitely helps free up some time, so that you can kind of fall back in love with stitching personal stuff, or doing something like that. So yeah, it'll definitely, I think, it's a little bit of a heart attack, sending it off and being like, oh, my baby. but but it'll be good. It'll be good if they're good at communicating with you. That's the key thing, is the communication. So yeah.
And I think your
Oh, yep.
comment wanting to be taken seriously, um, it it has been something. It goes back to that permission thing that I was talking to you about. You know, I think most people come to this with a history, right? You know, you have a work history, you have a personal history, you have a practice in art or not a practice in art, and all of a sudden you are putting that out into the public, and you are starting out, but you want to be taken seriously, and you also want to respect the people who've come before you. Like, you know, when I talk about Maggie, or I talk about Blackbird Designs, or I talk about Anne and Pat of Dying to Stitch, or there's so many people that have helped me to, like you with your sister, and the group that I see you stitching with. Like, there's all kinds of people that help make us who we are, because nobody becomes who they are on their own. That desire to be taken seriously. I've struggled with that a lot over 6 years, and especially because samplers are such a, it crosses the line from just an artistic or a decorative pursuit into something that's more intellectual, or it can be. And that need to be taken seriously and to kind of know your stuff, is it's and it's a good thing, but it's definitely one of those things that not only then the artistic part and the technical part then become part of that discussion when we're talking about samplers. It doesn't necessarily come into the discussion if you are making original pieces of art, like lots of people are. I've done that a couple of times, but I've used motifs from my samplers. That piece of being taken seriously becomes something that is part of your work, and is kind of along the journey of how you're going to become who you're going to become.
Yep. It is a struggle to do both. Um, I really like doing reproductions, but I also really like doing my original designs. I am still learning about antique samplers. I am not as knowledgeable as I'd like to be. Um, but it's a journey, and I'll just continue to learn and grow, and hopefully, gain some knowledge. But I do like my original designs. I think I'm more known for the Bigfoot designs and my Jewish designs than anything else. So and I'm fine with that. I am that makes me happy. But I also do want people to realize that I do put a lot of work into the reproductions as well. So yeah. Um, so I'm curious about this question. How would your friends describe you?
I saw that question, and I struggled. When I was growing up, I had some friends at school. I had a friend that was a friend at home. I went to high school and I had those same group of friends, and I moved away. And so I didn't maintain those friendships. And for very many years, part of the reason why I'm in the stitching community is because for probably about 10 years, I pursued promotions and titles, and my life was my job and my husband. And one day I sent an email off to a friend and said, or not to a friend, off to a person who was writing a blog. And you don't know me, but we share a lot in common. You cross stitch, and I don't know anybody that cross stitches. And she said, come over to my house, come over with a group of strangers. And I went over. And so I think through the through line for me has been, I've had some friends that I've had since I was a child, but I have very few adult friends that are kind of there because of job and those kinds of things. So I kind of struggle with that question, because um, one of the things that I find is missing from my life, and one of the things that I find in stitching, is I find those friendships, but they don't tend to get to the point where people actually know who I am. And so to me, it was one of the ones where I'm thinking, do I ask you not to ask me that question, because, or do I answer it without being honest, or do I actually say that part of the reason why I come to stitching is to find connection, and I'm not in a place. I work on my job. I work at Upper Canada Village. I have a very good relationship with my sister, but I see her very rarely. She lives an hour away. Um, and so I'm not sure I can see myself reflected through friendship, because my life has been one where friendship has got set aside, very much like right now my artistic work has got set aside. So I'm sure you were looking for a much more, you know, what they say, I'm stubborn, I'm kind, I'm kind, I'd give you the shirt off my back, I'm
Yeah.
gonna feed you, and then I'm going to try and feed you some more. I'm probably going to do so much for somebody else that I'm going to end up forgetting myself in the process. But that's how I see myself. So I'm not sure. And this is one of those things that I talk a lot about. When we were talking, you were talking about my Instagram, that it's showing up as myself and being honest in some of those cases, because I spent a great deal of time working in places where I was asked questions and I wanted to answer honestly, and I knew what the correct answer was. And for years I gave the correct answer. And now I'm much more interested in creating authentic conversation that might not take us in the place where somebody's looking for me to take it. And I think to myself, is that okay? And then I think yes, because I might open up a space where I might key something in you to say, you know what, I wasn't expecting that. She came completely out of left field. And you know what, that's why maybe I go to stitching as well. Or maybe that's why I get together with this group of stitchers, because my family can't understand this love. But these people over here that are complete strangers, that we really never talk about politics or religion or those kinds of things. We can, because that will happen, but I get together with them because I don't have to explain who I am. And it really isn't about that kind of real close friendship. It's more about filling that need in myself. And so those people might not actually get a chance to see who I really am, because we don't get enough time to spend together, because our
Yeah.
life is really just about getting the grind done. Do you
Yep.
know what
I do. I do. And that was a beautiful answer. Like, and I, yeah, that question was really to focused on getting you to kind of think about something that you wouldn't normally think about, like what do people, but going to like the stitching group for me is the same thing. Like, we don't really talk about politics. We share the love of stitching. We enable each other, that kind of thing. Before all this, I was in a very dark place. I was taken advantage of by people who I thought were my friends, non-stitching related or anything, just local people and they were taking advantage of me and that kind of thing. And then I found the stitching community, when um, I created a local stitching group, and then I started my Flosstube and that kind of thing. And my life changed. So I think, I think you on your Instagram posts are like me on my floss tubes. I don't hide anything. I do a complete life update. My life has been horrible for the past year, so I leave it to the end, because there are people who want to know what is going on in our lives. And that's what makes the stitching community amazing. It really is. They may not know me in real life. They may not know you in real life, but through our posts and that kind of thing, we've created a relationship, and they see you because you're the true you in your posts. I'm the true me in my videos. So it's the same thing. You come across as a genuine, caring, very knowledgeable person um, in everything that you do. So I loved your answer, and I get it when it comes to real life and friends and that kind of thing, 100%. So yes. Um, Before we kind of wrap it up, I was just curious if you have like a favorite go-to must-have item for when you're stitching, like besides, our basics with the linen and the needle and the thread and stuff.
um um I think a needle threader. I've got one that's a very fine one. It's a little white one, and it's got a metal, and it's really, really fine. Um, that to me is indispensable. Like I can make do with any kind of scissors. I can, I have to stitch. I can't stitch in hand. I have to stitch two-handed. I don't enjoy any other way. So there's some kind of frame. So if it's a needlework system 4 or a Hardwick or LBC, whatever you call it. But if I have my basics, the thing that kind of everything hinges on is that needle threader. Now, of course, I'm getting to the point where I need a magnifier, that kind of stuff, but it seems like such a small thing. And I think I can buy 2 of them for under $5. I've got 4 of them on my side table where I stitch. And it's like, if I have less than that there, I start to get nervous. It's like, okay, because they'll break sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm gonna have to order some more because I can't have less than that, because there was one day I couldn't find them and all of a sudden I was trying to, yeah, no, that's just not
Uh,
what.
Nope. I'm the same way. I wish I had one. I use the metal needle threaders that have the 2 ends and they have a hole in them. And so I put like, I don't have one right next to me, but I put like a fob like this in the hole of the needle threader, because those little metal flat ones, I love them, but they like disappear. But if I put a fob on there, then, you know, at least I have it. But I don't have time to sit there trying to get that thread in the needle. I gotta be stitching. So I get it. I get it 100%.
One other thing I should mention as well. Do you have time for me to tell you a story?
Oh yeah.
So I stitch two-handed, so my pattern is always on the frame. And for years I tried to find a way to deal with my pattern and I couldn't find it. So I went to ABC Stitch Therapy. They were in New Hampshire and they moved to Texas. I went down there and I bought these little white magnets and I thought, oh my goodness, I'm going to magnet my pattern to, and I'd never seen this because there was no blogs or this kind of stuff. Nobody I knew stitched. So I found these magnets and they were $25 for 4 magnets. Okay, yeah, $25 for 4 magnets.
Oh.
This is the way I remember the story. I don't want to say that, like, anyway, maybe I'm a little bit off, but I'm pretty sure I'm right with the price. So anyway, I got all excited, and you forward to this friend that I told you about that invited me to a retreat at her house. I then found a stitch shop owner in Brighton, Ontario. She had a retreat. I went to this first retreat. I thought I didn't know what was going to happen. I had to go in the bathroom for half an hour and hyperventilate because I went to a retreat with people I didn't know, and this whole thing, right?
Yep.
So fast forward years later, I then have a community of people. And I go to this retreat when it was being run by Anne, who ran Dying to Stitch, and then Bonnie took over. And she and now I'm going to forget her name. It's going to come back to me. Kristen would buy gifts for us. And so they'd leave them on our pillows on our beds. And so there was these tiny little magnets, and they're just like the end of my finger. And
Okay.
there was a bunch of them in there. And I come down and I'm flopping down the stairs and I'm like, Bonnie, Kristen, Bonnie, where did you get these? Where did these come from? Do you mind telling me? And they said, oh, well, we bought those at Lee Valley Tools. I said, you're kidding me. My sister's worked at this particular company for 30 some years. And so then I bring out my phone, I start looking at it. Each magnet is 19 cents.
Ouch.
So anyway, if anyone is ever looking for, and I'm not being paid, and I'm not doing this because my sister works there. These things are phenomenal. They're rare earth magnets. And if you want to find a way to put your pattern on your piece, and very small and tiny ones, I don't know whether they're 19 cents anymore, but rare earth magnets absolutely is right up there with a needle threader.
That's awesome. $25 for 4 magnets. Whew, that's a lot.
I always say it's my bonehead story.
Oh, I love it though, because you didn't know, and it was a great idea because people do that now. So, I put all my patterns on my iPad because I need to zoom in, see stuff, and I can just mark it off that way. It's easier for me, 100%. But so before we get to the last question, which is my most favorite, is there anything that you want to share that most people kind of don't know about you? I know you and I are pretty much open books, so there's not really a whole lot that I would have.
No, I think I've said it before, but I think I've said it here. The most important part of what I do is connection, and that's a connection for me to who I am from where I come from. It's a connection to, and I quote this one a lot, but I love Craft in America. It's a PBS TV show, and the director of the Penland School, I think it's Penland. Anyway, he talks about when people meet each other, and he says, he kind of relates it this way. He says a duck says quack and a duck says quack, and he says that that's just saying we're the kind of people that make and do things. And so when I make that connection with people, you were talking about friendship. Sometimes I have found it hard in my life to make and maintain friendships. And so I think, having worked for many, many years in banking and other places where who I wasn't how I was allowed to or encouraged to show up, those opportunities when I first started, I'd had it when I was an artist, when I was in high school, studying fine art for a year and a half, but I never felt like I was as good as other people. I felt like I was a copier because I was copying the masters, and I was, I was learning painting, but I was painting copies of Durer and Albrecht Dürer and Botticelli. And so I never felt like I fit. And it was because I didn't think I was artistic enough or creative enough or talented enough, because I was with people who, and I was in a specialized fine arts program, and I turned it around, but behind those is actually a painting. I've shown it many times of a copy of one of Durer's pieces. And so that connection that I then have had, I spent very many years not having, and working in places where people didn't get me. Like it's like you and we've had very little opportunity to sit and talk, but yet I immediately feel it. And we can, and I can pick things up in a conversation with someone and with you, and I'm not having to explain myself. And when I'm hearing you, there's so much that resonates, and it's that experience of going places and meeting people where our histories, our loves, our passions, all the stuff that is outside of that is really important. But the fact that we're people who make and do things, and I don't have to explain that to me at the end of the day is why I do this. And it's those connections. And I think part of that is because, back to that friendship thing, I moved away from an area where my mom was very much connected to the women of her family, and there was a very they'd be going back and forth to each other's houses. I grew up in a community where I was either related to you or I was related to you. Like, my mom's family had been there for generations. That wasn't the case in my dad's family, but I walked away from that when I was 18 to get an education. And so that I'm constantly in some ways missing that connection of women in my life, and women who understand and support you and think you're a big deal. You know what I mean? Like, they're just, and you share that connection with. Where for us, it was family. There was people who were creative, and my aunt was a maker, but nobody was just like me, but it didn't matter. But when it comes to the work I do, and the things that I put out, and the wanting to show up as myself, it's about making that connection. And I think we underrate how much that happens within our community. And I think some people don't, they understand. And I think you understand. But that connection to me is why I show up in the way that I show up, in the hopes that it's going to make a connection for somebody else. And it may not be the connection with me. It might be a connection to themselves or to something they're doing. Or it might be to finding their own friend group because they're afraid to reach out because they're, kind of stuck in a job or stuck in a place, and they know that they need something. And they need that connection, but they're afraid to reach out because they're afraid of rejection or all the things that kind of separate us and make us different. But when, just like happened at Hobby House, I rolled up to a table and sat down, and I sat down next to a lady who I didn't know who she was. We started talking. We were actually talking about interpretation. We were talking because her husband is doing some first person interpretation, which is much harder, in my opinion, than what I do. And we started talking about different things. And then all of a sudden she introduced herself. Well, I know of her work, and I'm very impressed of her work. I've heard wonderful things. And she's Stitch Folk. It's
Very,
Mary. Yes, I was going to say Mary. And what did she do? She had bought a magazine that she was showing me, and then all of a sudden she gifted me a magazine. Well, I couldn't. She said, well, you've got to just accept. Kind of, it was the idea that I couldn't accept a gift without giving a gift. And so I went upstairs and I got her a pin cushion that I use when I'm at work, that I could not imagine not giving her back what that simple gesture mean to me, because I'm usually the person who gives to other people and doesn't readily accept from other people. It's hard for me to do that. But it's that connection where I don't know what her, and I admire her even more for what she's doing, but I admired her and connected with her before she knew my name and before I knew her name. We hadn't even exchanged names. I didn't know who she was. She obviously knew who I was, but to me that was irrelevant because I was connecting with another person who understood me and I didn't have to explain it.
Yeah.
And to me
That's,
that is precious.
yep. I think that's the best feeling. And I think that's the stitching community, period. You go to a retreat, you don't know anybody, you sit down at a table and you immediately have 5 other friends or however many's at the table. And I think that's the other thing is you see a lot of people will comment like on my post when I post my stitchy group picture, because we like to take a picture every meetup and just so we have that. And there's people that are like, oh, you're so lucky I don't have a stitching group. I'm like, start one, just reach out, put yourself out there. You have social media. um you just need to find one other person, and then that one other person may know somebody. Like, it it's hard because as stitchers you think that we're kind of a, what's the word, just a singular, you keep to ourselves kind of person, because stitching you can do that, but we're also social. We like to stitch in groups. So my advice would be to reach out and just say, hey, does anybody in my area want to get together? We can meet at Starbucks or we can meet at Panera, wherever. Because it is the most incredible feeling to be able to sit at a table with other stitchers, look at their work, and just kind of forget about the craziness that's going on for an hour or two. So yeah, I totally get that. I do 100%. Um, actually, I'm curious, have you ever thought of starting a floss tube? Because I think you would be amazing. I think it would be the most interesting, like however long the video is time, um, watching your videos.
Um, so when I was a kid, and I'll go quick on this because I know we're getting to the end, and I'm going to answer the question, but I'm going to take you in a roundabout way, which is my way. I did a public speech, and I grew up in an area where I did not meet anyone who didn't look like me until I was 18. When a Black Canadian family and a family from India moved into our area. I was lucky enough to travel to the United States with my dad, and I got to meet people who looked different and who had different backgrounds from me. But where I came from was white. And one of the reasons why I moved away at 18 was I wanted to experience other people's cultures. But the point is that I was in an area, I don't know how I gave that speech, but I was giving a speech about Martin Luther King. And I had stitch cards. And when we started talking, I said to you, I have a learning disability. And if I try and memorize things and I get nervous, I won't remember. So sometimes I'm better off the cuff. And so I thought for years and years and years that I wasn't a public speaker, to the point where I went back to college when I was 35 and I got a second college diploma. I had an academic dean come in before I was supposed to. We had a research project, and my research project or my business proposal was this job that I'm doing. And so I had thought of this for years and years and years. This was in, I was 35, so 85, 95, 2005, no, 2010, 2010. And so he walked in. So I'm 35 years old, and he walks in with a camera and he says, after the break, whoever's next, I want to film you. I went to the bathroom and bawled because I was ready to quit, and I'm the kind of person that I'm self-conscious about how I look. And so when I started to work there, this same guy that I had been my academic dean eventually became my boss, my manager, and then became my colleague as I managed to go through different positions. And so I just about bawled because I was afraid that I couldn't actually do that. We had events where we were pictures being taken. He'd grab me and say, here, you have to have your picture taken. I'm like, I don't want my picture taken. And if you go forward, what job do I do? I'm a living history interpreter. I have thousands of people come into my building. and talk to me. They photograph me, they videotape me, they stand beside me. Some of them see me as as a person, but some of them see me as somebody like a Disney, um,
Like
personality.
yeah.
And so they will invade your space, which I don't mind, because they're connecting with what I say, and that's okay. So hands go around you no matter how much I stink of sweat, or because it's hot, and so their hand will go around me. So I've eventually got to a place where I can manage that. But one of the things that's held me back, and I talk on Instagram, is about showing up as who I am. I'm a round person. I've got a round face. I'm self-conscious about how I actually physically look. Um, and I know that that is a privilege, because there are people who have facial, or bodily, differences that they can't actually change, that do make it even harder for them to fit into society. So I often think about that in terms of my hesitance to show up as who I am. And it's one of the reasons why I talk about that Instagram, and I may or may not have been as open, and I think I have, but that has been a progress for me. And it's never been about what I actually say that holds me back. It's about how I physically present. And that, and I know that many women and other people who are not women, who don't identify as women, whoever they are, and whatever their situation is, they don't show up as who they are because they know that there are things that are holding them back. And there could be all kinds of those reasons, and I kind of touched on some of those in the samplers. But the point is I would like to, and I constantly think about it. And then I think to myself, the same way sometimes I think about the knowledge about who do I think I am, and I allow it to hold me back. So I think, again, like with many of those questions, it's something I'd like to do and I'm working on. But just like I share on Instagram, for me, it's a journey. And it's a journey about some of those things that through my career, I've been able to kind of avoid or have other ways of being able to deal with. But now, as a solo entrepreneur, one of the most important things is getting my work seen and sharing my work. And because I live in a rural area in Ontario, most of the market, the people who are interested in my product, are in the United States or other places. The way to do that is online. But the reason why, when you contacted me and said yes, was that aversion therapy. Because normally what happens is I'm looking here, and I'm not sure if you can see that. I'm looking at myself. I'm looking at, the fact that I tend to go red in the face when I get nervous or I get excited. It doesn't matter, either one.
I do too. I do too.
It's one of those things where, okay, this person's offering me an opportunity to go there. And I can tell you that my response to this is completely different than it was 2 years ago. And in sharing that and kind of taking us off on tangents, it's continuing with that, allowing people to show up how they are, who they are, and supporting them to have a place within the industry and within the community, so that if I will do it. I know I'm going to get there. It's kind of like getting to the point where, like, as you were saying, getting a model stitcher or getting help with my books, or being able to get far enough where I invest and get an iPad. I know I need that iPad to do it, or I know I need this. From a personal standpoint, I think I'm getting there, to the point where it's like, okay, you can take the photograph of me, you can watch me speak. It's not about actually this, it's about this, because where I speak comes from here. And I think I'm much closer to being in a place where I can share that. And I think the most recent hobby house retreat was where I showed up in front of people and did exactly what I did today, which was, like I said to you, first off, have a learning disability. It's not going to work if I memorize, if I just go off the cuff and I just am who I am. Then I show up as who that person is. It might not be what you're expecting, but here's who I am. And what I'm most interested in is I'm most interested in seeing the connection in your face when I'm talking to you.
Yep. I think that when you're comfortable doing it, I think that you'll be amazing. Just having this conversation through this whole interview is, you're incredible with you just flow basically when you're talking. And it is a little different recording a floss tube where you're talking to yourself basically, even though you're talking to people. So it is a little different. But I will tell you that the cross stitch community typically does not judge. I had just celebrated my 4-year Flosstube anniversary, and I think that I may, in the 4 years, I've only had maybe 1 or 2 negative comments in the 4 years, and not even about how I look. And I'm the same. I do not like pictures taken. My daughter's taught me that, you got to take the picture from up here so that the double chin doesn't show, that kind of thing. I got that. But I will say that once you put yourself out there and do that first video, and yes, it's going to be completely awkward and you're going to be like, why did I even post this? The feedback and the amount of people that are going to find you and just leave you such amazing comments, I think that it'll be an incredible journey for you when you're ready. And I think you're going to blow the Flosstube community out of the water, because I think you have so much information, so many samplers, and just so much life, to talk about, that I think it'll be really interesting. So when it's going to be amazing. So last question, and it's my favorite. It makes you kind of think, because the past few years have not been the greatest for everybody. So what is the best thing that has happened to you within the past couple of years?
Oh, I guess I should have looked at that when I thought I think the best thing that's happened is this whole thing we've been talking about today. And it's showing up as myself and working on setting more clear boundaries for myself about how I show up. And kind of all this stuff that I've wanted and always dreamed about coalescing to a place where instead of dreaming about it, I'm doing it. Instead of thinking I've got to just keep hustling because one day I'm going to get there, and always looking forward to the goal and to the end result, and which never brought me happiness in all the jobs. Like I said, I worked in a bunch of different careers, and I was chasing titles and promotions, and I'm going to be happy when. And even though I knew that was not really the answer, it was more about a journey and being happy along the journey rather than a destination. I'm finally getting to a place where I'm not thinking that I have to hustle so hard to have it, to actually just have the opportunity to do it. I'm settling into, I'm doing it, and I'm just going to enjoy it the whole way along. And that sounds like an easy thing to do, but if you've been in environments and in careers or lifestyle, which is, I'm going to be happy when, like, happy when I have a baby, I'm going to be happy when I get married, I'm going to be and I'm just talking from a woman's perspective here, from a traditional standpoint in which I was raised, that is not how I live as somebody who doesn't have children, who did get married. Like, there was lots of things that I should have done if I was from a what I was taught growing up. You should be these things. Well, I didn't do those things, I did something else. And in that process, it was, I'm going to get an education, and I'm going to be happy when I get a promotion, and I'm going to be happy when I get this level, and I'm going to be happy when I make this much money, and I want to make as much money as my husband, and I want to be taken seriously at my job, and I want to be. And at the end of the day, that didn't bring me happiness. But going after who I was, somebody who's creative, who is kind, who wants to make connection, who wants to share the joy of making and other people's lives, and learn about other people's cultures and experiences, and constantly be learning and opening that empathy up to the world, not being focused on what is that next goal, instead of where is this journey taking me, what is my life trying to teach me, and where do I want to go, where do I want this, how do I want to navigate this journey, rather than where is my destination. That's really been something that I've kind of found that through COVID and through the last couple of years, I've kind of stepped into. So I think that would be it.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's incredible. Personal growth, becoming more comfortable, that kind of thing. And it's going to be a continuation to come too. So that is awesome. I want to thank you so much because I know you're a very, very busy woman. We've been trying to make this happen for a little while, so I'm so happy that it has happened. This it wasn't even really an interview, it was just basically a chat about stitching. Has been incredible. I've learned a lot. You've inspired me. I hope you've inspired others as well and helped others feel more comfortable with, antique samplers and such. So thank you so much for taking time out of your day. I truly appreciate it. So all right. Well, we're going to say bye to everybody on FlossTube.